My hands were trembling as I held the silver-wrapped gift box. Behind me, my husband of 45 years stood frozen in his freshly pressed suit. The words hit me like ice water poured down my back. Mom, Dad, you're not invited. This is my day. Please leave. She had no idea we could cancel everything with a few phone calls. By sunset, her perfect wedding would crumble around her, and she'd learn what happens when you throw away the parents who sacrificed everything for you. The venue contract has your name on it, Richard whispered, his voice shaking with disbelief. I nodded silently, still staring at our daughter's cold expression. How could we have raised someone who would do this to us, after everything we had given her? I remember checking my appearance one last time in the hallway mirror before we left for the wedding. My hair was freshly styled, a splurge at $85 that I rarely allowed myself. The pale blue dress had been carefully selected to complement the wedding colors without drawing attention. Richard adjusted his tie, the same one he'd worn to Olivia's college graduation. "Do I look okay?" I asked, smoothing imaginary wrinkles from my skirt. "Beautiful as always, Margaret," he said, with that smile that still warmed me after all these years. On the hallway table sat the silver-wrapped box containing my mother's necklace. 3 generations of Wilson women had worn it on their wedding days. I had cleaned and polished the antique silver and pearl pendant until it gleamed. I imagined Olivia's face when she opened it, perhaps a rare moment of emotion from our increasingly distant daughter. The drive to Lakeside Gardens was filled with light conversation and memories. Remember when Olivia used to make us those construction paper cards? Richard chuckled, the ones where she'd trace her hand to make a turkey at Thanksgiving, and insist we display them on the fridge until they fell apart, I added, smiling at the memory of our little girl with pigtails and boundless enthusiasm. Where had that little girl gone? When had she transformed into the woman who now barely returned our calls? We arrived at the venue, the elegant garden estate that Richard and I had paid for from his retirement fund. $32,000 for the venue alone. The flowers, the catering, the photographer, the band, all bearing our signatures on the contracts. Even the wedding planner had been our suggestion when Olivia became overwhelmed with the details. As we walked toward the ceremony space, a young woman with a clipboard approached. "You must be Mr. and Mrs. Wilson Olivia's parents, right?" "Yes, that's us," Richard replied warmly. "Olivia asked me to bring you to her when you arrived. She's in the bridal suite." We followed her through manicured gardens where workers were making final adjustments to the floral arch, white roses and blue hydrangeas, just as Olivia had wanted. I noticed the string quartet setting up near the rows of white chairs. Everything was perfect, just as we had planned. The woman knocked on a door decorated with a hand-lettered bride sign. "Olivia, your parents are here." The door opened, and there stood our daughter in her wedding gown, not the one she had initially chosen with me. I noticed this was more elaborate, with delicate beadwork across the bodice that must have cost a fortune. Her hair was swept up elegantly, her makeup flawless. For a moment, I felt a surge of maternal pride, my beautiful daughter on her wedding day. Then I saw her expression. There was no warmth, no joy at seeing us. Instead, her lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes cool and assessing. Behind her, I glimpsed several young women in matching blue dresses, her bridesmaids, watching with curious expressions. "Mom, Dad," she said, her voice flat and businesslike. "What are you doing back here?" Richard frowned slightly. "The wedding coordinator brought us. We wanted to see you before the ceremony, give you our gift." I extended the silver box, smiling despite the growing unease in my stomach. "It's your grandmother's necklace, the one you always admired. I thought maybe you'd want to wear it today." Olivia didn't take the box. Instead, she stepped into the hallway, pulling the door mostly closed behind her. "Look," she said, lowering her voice. "There's been a change of plans." "What do you mean?" I asked. She sighed, as if explaining something to a child. "Mom, Dad, you're not invited to the ceremony or reception. This is my day, and Tyler and I have decided we want it to be just our friends and his family. Please leave." The words didn't make sense at first. Not invited to our own daughter's wedding, the wedding we had paid for. "I don't understand," Richard said, his voice suddenly hoarse. "We're your parents. We've arranged everything." "And I appreciate that," Olivia said without a hint of actual appreciation. "But this is what Tyler and I want. His parents have certain expectations about the kind of wedding this should be, and honestly, it's just better this way. Better without us." The implication hung in the air, unspoken but unmistakable. "Olivia," I began, my voice trembling, "we've spent months helping you plan. We've paid for everything. Your father took money from his retirement account to give you the wedding you wanted." She shrugged, a small, dismissive gesture that cut deeper than any words. "And I'm grateful, but this day isn't about you or what you've paid for. It's about Tyler and me starting our life together." A young man in an expensive suit approached, Tyler, Olivia's fiancé of 2 years. Tall, handsome, from what Olivia had described as a good family. He placed a proprietary hand on her shoulder. "Is everything okay here?" he asked, his eyes coolly assessing us. "Fine," Olivia said. "I was just explaining to my parents that the guest list has changed." Tyler nodded, not even pretending to look sympathetic. "I'm sorry about the confusion, but we really need to stick to our plan. The ceremony starts in 20 minutes. Behind them, the door opened slightly, and a bridesmaid peeked out. She whispered something to Olivia, and they both laughed, a small, exclusive moment of amusement that felt like another deliberate exclusion. I stood there, the gift box heavy in my hands. As the reality of the situation sank in, my throat went dry. Around us, guests had begun to arrive, some glancing curiously in our direction. One woman, Tyler's mother, I realized from the photos Olivia had shown us, gave me a look I couldn't forget. A mix of surprise and mild irritation, as if we were uninvited strangers causing a scene. She knew who we were. She had to know. Yet she turned away without acknowledgement, guiding an elderly couple toward the seating area. "You should go," Olivia said, already turning back toward the bridal suite. "The planner can show you out a side entrance so you won't disturb the arriving guests." I looked at our daughter, really looked. Her face was calm, not angry, not conflicted, not sad, just blank, completely blank. Like we were a minor problem she needed to solve before getting back to her important day. Richard stood beside me, silent. I felt his hand clench beside mine. I knew that tension in his jaw all too well, the kind of stillness he maintained when trying not to show pain. I thought of all the moments leading to this betrayal. The day Olivia told me not to come to her dress fitting. "It'll be tight, Mom. I'll send you photos." She never did. The venue confirmation she forwarded to us with the curt message, "We picked this one. Hope you're okay with it." We weren't included in the decision. We were merely informed. The florist calling me for final approval on arrangements I hadn't selected. I paid without complaint, not wanting to stress Olivia. "Mom, don't stress me," she had said when I asked about seeing the centerpiece mock-ups. "I just want to enjoy this." And I had let it go, like I let everything go, because I thought that's what a mother does. And now she was telling us to leave, in front of everyone, like we were uninvited guests who had crashed her wedding. Olivia turned and walked away, rejoining her bridesmaids. The door closed with a soft click that somehow felt more final than a slam would have. The wedding coordinator approached, her professional smile faltering slightly. Mr. and Mrs. Wilson, if you'll follow me, I can show you to a side exit. Richard found his voice first. That won't be necessary. We know our way out. We left quietly, heads held high despite the burning humiliation. We walked past the floral arch we had paid for, past the catering van we had arranged, past the chairs we had selected together 6 months ago. We got into our car. I held the gift box in my lap, staring at it for a long time. I didn't cry. Not yet. She threw us away, I said, barely above a whisper. Richard sat back in the seat, his hands gripping the steering wheel, though he hadn't started the engine. We raised a princess and got an ice queen. My heart felt like it cracked down the middle, but I nodded. I thought about the skipped birthdays, the quick replies to our messages, the times she said she was too busy to visit, the way she said, "We just need space right now," when we asked if we could stop by. She had been distancing herself for a while. We just didn't want to admit it. She told her friends we had insisted on paying. We didn't. We had offered with love, wanting to give her the perfect day. She took our money, took our time, took our help, and now she acted like we were strangers intruding on her special moment. "Stop the car," I said suddenly, though we hadn't moved. "Where? Anywhere with Wi-Fi." Richard nodded, turned on the engine, and pulled out of the parking lot. He drove a few miles down the road to a small cafe with a free Wi-Fi sign in the window. We walked inside, sat down, and opened our phones. The wedding was still happening, the guests were still arriving, the flowers were still being arranged. The music would soon play, the photos would be taken, but not for long. Our names were on the contracts. The final payments were pending for many services. We still had control. Richard looked at me, a question in his eyes. For 45 years, I had been the peacemaker in our family, the one who smoothed things over, who forgave quickly, who put others first, always. Not today, I nodded. "Do it." Richard called the venue manager. I called the florist, then the decorator, then the caterer, then the music coordinator. "Yes, I understand the event is already happening," I said calmly to the catering manager, "but I'm the one who signed the contract, and I'm canceling the service." "Yes, I understand the timing," I told the band leader. "Yes, I'm aware it will cause disruption." No yelling, no threats, just calm, cold clarity. She had thrown us away. So, we were taking our gift with us, all of it. Within the hour, calls and texts started flooding our phones. The wedding planner first. "Mrs. Wilson, there's been some confusion with the vendors. They're saying services have been canceled." Then Olivia, "What is going on? Why is everything shutting down?" I didn't answer. Let them ring. I sat in that cafe, drinking cold coffee and making quiet calls, and felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not bitterness, just finality. She had chosen to cut us out. So we stepped all the way out, and she would feel the loss, because without us, there would be no music, no dinner, no flowers, no celebration. She wanted us invisible. Fine, then everything we gave her would disappear too. I did. We drove home in silence, not the comforting kind of silence built from years of understanding, but the heavy kind that sinks into your bones. The road stretched long, and the sky, once bright with wedding day promise, turned a pale, indifferent gray. I stared out the window, not really seeing anything. It wasn't just what Olivia had done today. It was everything that came before, everything we had ignored, forgiven, or explained away. Each mile brought memories sharper than the last, stacking one atop another until I could hardly breathe. I remembered when Olivia was 16 and we bought her first car. Not new, but safe and reliable. A sensible blue Honda that cost $7,000 from our savings. She didn't say thank you. She just took the keys and drove to her friend's house. I didn't ask for a used one, she had muttered under her breath. Richard had laughed it off. Teenagers, he'd said with a shrug. I told myself she'd appreciate it later. She never did. Then college. We co-signed her loans, paid her rent the first year, sent care packages with handwritten notes and homemade cookies. She called when she needed something, more money for books, help with a paper, advice on a difficult roommate, but rarely just to talk. When she graduated, she invited us to the ceremony but sat with her friends afterward, taking pictures with Tyler's family, whom she'd only known for a few months. We had to ask a stranger to take one photo of the three of us. Still, we smiled and celebrated her achievement. We told ourselves it was her age, that she'd mature, but it didn't stop. When she got her first job in marketing, we helped her move to the new city. We bought her furniture, spent 2 weekends setting up her apartment. She said thanks once, without a hug or a card, then left to meet a friend for dinner. The signs were there, years of small dismissals, quiet rejections, subtle erasures, but we kept showing up because that's what parents do, right? We give, we stay, we hope. I looked at Richard as he drove, his face unreadable except for the tightness in his jaw, the way his fingers tapped against the steering wheel. He felt it too, the years, the hurt, all of it rising now that the curtain had been pulled back so completely. When we got home, I didn't even go inside right away. I sat on the porch, still holding the silver-wrapped box. That necklace had been my mother's. She had worn it at her wedding. I had worn it at mine. Olivia had once played with it as a child, spinning in front of the mirror, saying, I want this when I get married. She hadn't even glanced at the box today. Inside, I heard Richard on the phone, his voice calm but sharp as he canceled remaining payments. I knew that tone. It only emerged when he'd reached a breaking point. I finally went inside, set the box on the kitchen table, and sat down across from it like it was a person I needed to confront. Then I opened my laptop, emails, dozens of them, all the wedding planning correspondence we had been looped into, then slowly pushed out of. We decided to go with a different cake vendor. Can you just send the deposit directly to the planner? It'll be easier. We moved the rehearsal to Friday afternoon. Hope that still works for you. Hope. They always hoped, but never asked. Olivia and Tyler had positioned us as assistants, as support staff, never family. The longer I read, the clearer it became we were only invited to contribute, not to participate. We were ATMs with emotions they found inconvenient. I scrolled through my text messages with her. Short answers, delayed responses, messages left on read. One stood out from 3 weeks ago. Me, are you free this weekend? Would love to have lunch. Just us. Olivia, can't. Wedding errands, maybe another time. Another time never came. And yet I kept trying. The resentment wasn't a sharp sting anymore. It was steady, a pulse beneath everything. I made dinner that night on autopilot, stirred the sauce, set the table, washed my hands twice because I forgot I'd already done it. Richard didn't say much. We were both trying to process what we'd allowed, not just today, but for years. After we ate, he pulled out the box with the wedding invoices, laid them out one by one, venue final payment still owed. Florist deposit made, balance unpaid. Photographer final payment due this week. Band half paid, half pending. She never confirmed the final guest count with the caterer. The manager had mentioned they might not even have had enough food. I stared at the papers, each line a reminder of what we gave and how little it mattered. It wasn't just about money. It was the absence of care. The decision to exclude us from the moment she had claimed as her own after we built it for her. Later that evening, the calls started again. Unknown number. Voicemail. Then her number. Olivia, I didn't answer. Let it ring. Then she texted, "What is going on? Why is everything shutting down?" I read the message 3 times. She didn't say, "Why did you leave?" or "I'm sorry." She asked why her event was falling apart. No acknowledgement of what she did. No remorse, just panic over the consequences. I didn't respond. 2 hours later, another message. "Did you cancel everything?" "That's so cruel. How could you ruin the most important day of my life?" I stared at the screen. The most important day of her life. Ours didn't matter. Our place in it didn't matter. I typed one sentence. "You told us we weren't invited, so we left." And that was it. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of years of choices, of the slow erosion of something we didn't want to admit had been breaking for a long time. Olivia had made her choice. We were making ours. And it started with finally stepping back from someone who only called when she needed something. That night, I didn't sleep much. But for once, it wasn't because I was worried about Olivia. It was because I finally understood the truth. And once you see the truth, you can't unsee it, and you don't go back. The next morning, I made coffee and sat by the window, watching the sun rise. Richard joined me, pouring a cup and sitting across from me without a word. We didn't need words. We were both thinking the same thing. We were done begging to be included. We were done explaining why we mattered. A few more texts arrived that day, from her friends, from Tyler's parents, all asking why we had acted out. They didn't ask what Olivia had said. They didn't know we were told to leave. She hadn't told them the truth. She had painted us as difficult, as dramatic, as unreasonable. It didn't matter. We had the receipts, the contracts, the records, and the truth. And that was enough, because for the first time in decades, we were choosing ourselves, and it felt like a door closing softly, not with anger, but with peace. I didn't answer the phone for 3 days. Every call, every text, every message that buzzed across the screen, I let sit. Not because I didn't see them, but because I needed to sit with myself first. I had to look at the reality I had denied for too long. I spent the third day going through old folders in the hall closet, contracts, bank transfers, emails I had printed out. I opened an envelope with our last will and testament, still naming Olivia as our sole beneficiary. I stared at it for a long time. What had we done? I went into the living room. Richard was watching the news, though his unfocused eyes told me he wasn't really seeing it. I handed him the envelope. "We need to talk to someone," I said. He didn't hesitate. He just nodded. That afternoon, we made an appointment with a financial planner, not our usual one, but someone new, someone with no ties to Olivia. I wanted someone who would look at our accounts like we were just names and numbers, not a family on the edge of something irreversible. At the office, we explained our situation carefully. Not all the emotions, not the humiliation, just the facts. We paid for a wedding we weren't allowed to attend. We were removed from the event, but still financially responsible for it. The planner blinked. "And you want to know how to secure your assets going forward?" "That," I said, "and how to limit access." He asked about joint accounts, about any shared financial documents. "She doesn't have direct access," I said. "Not directly," Richard added, "but she's persuasive. She knows how to make it seem like an emergency." The planner smiled, polite but not warm. He had heard this before. We left with a folder of options: trust structures, emergency freezes, new wills, all the tools people don't think they need until they're too deep in the guilt to see clearly. That night, while folding laundry, a memory hit me so hard I dropped a towel. I was 19. My father had just remarried. One evening, I showed up at his house without calling first. His new wife answered the door. He stood behind her. "He didn't invite me in," he said. "You should have called first. This is our space now." That sting, that shame, I hadn't felt it in years, but I felt it again when my daughter used those same words. "This is my day. You're not invited." And just like that, I was back on that doorstep, unwanted. And then something strange happened. I began to feel angry, not just hurt, but angry. And that was new. The next morning, I sat down with my laptop and opened Olivia's social media. There it was, photos from what was left of the wedding, captions filled with phrases like resilient love and unshakable bond. Not one mention of us. A photo of her and Tyler's parents, smiling, laughing. I looked closer. That dress, it was altered. Not the one she had initially chosen with me. The one we paid for had been sent back. "It doesn't fit the theme," she had said. Another picture, her and Tyler standing beside a simple arch, not the elaborate floral display we had ordered. That must have been removed when the florist left. And still, she pretended it all went smoothly. My chest tightened. She didn't just exclude us, she erased us. My phone buzzed. This time, it was a number I didn't recognize. I answered. "Is this Mrs. Wilson, Olivia's mother?" "Yes." "Hi, my name is Jessica. I work for Bloom and Petal Events. We handled some of the floral arrangements at your daughter's wedding. We received a partial cancellation. Then the event stopped mid-preparation. I just wanted to clarify what to invoice." Partial cancellation. I realized Olivia must have tried to salvage things, tried to rebook services behind our backs after we pulled the payments, called the vendors in a panic, probably. "Send the invoice to me directly," I said. "We'll settle the remaining cancellation fees, nothing more." "Understood." I hung up. Another lie. Another attempt to work around us, not with us. I pulled out the financial planner's folder again. This time, I read everything: trusts, transfers, contingencies. Richard came in from the garage, wiping his hands on a rag. I showed him the page I'd bookmarked. "I want to do it, all of it." "Are you sure?" he asked quietly. We had spent 28 years thinking she'd come around, 28 years believing that our love would eventually be enough. He didn't argue. By the end of the week, we had met with a lawyer, set up new documentation, removed Olivia from automatic inheritance, changed access protocols on all joint accounts. The lawyer was sharp, kind, but focused. "You don't have to justify this," she said. "You're protecting yourselves. That's what responsible people do." We also asked about future protections, a clause for any attempt at manipulation or pressure, clear boundaries. She helped us create them. That night, Olivia finally called again. I answered. "Hi, Mom." Just hearing her voice made something cold rise in me. "Hi. I feel like everything spiraled out of control. I didn't mean to hurt you. I just needed the day to be perfect." I waited. "I thought you understood how much pressure I was under. You know how weddings are. Blame shifting, classic Olivia. You told us to leave." "I didn't mean it like that. You said we weren't invited." Silence. Then, "Can we just move past this?" "No," I said. "What do you mean?" "I mean, we're not going to pretend it didn't happen, and we're not going back to how things were." She started crying, tears after everything. "I don't know what else to say. You said enough. You made your choice. Now we're making ours." I could have yelled. I could have screamed all the things she had taken from us, the way she had used our love like a credit line. But I chose to remain calm, because sometimes silence is the sharpest answer. I hung up. It was quiet afterward, but it was the right kind of quiet, because we were finally free from the loop where love meant sacrifice and silence. Now it meant boundaries and consequences. and something in me finally began to heal. After a week of silence, the house felt different, emptier, maybe, but also strangely peaceful, like the calm that follows a storm when you discover you're still standing. I found myself wandering through rooms with new eyes. In our bedroom, I noticed the reading chair that had been temporarily placed in the corner 15 years ago, positioned perfectly for late-night calls from Olivia during her college years. Calls that gradually dwindled until they stopped altogether. I moved it to face the window instead, where morning light would make it ideal for the novels I'd been meaning to read. In the guest room, Olivia's old room, a closet still held boxes of her childhood things, art projects from elementary school, yearbooks, a collection of snow globes from places we'd visited as a family. I had kept them all, preserved like artifacts from a happier time. I sat on the edge of the bed, holding a paper Mach butterfly she had made in second grade. Its wings were lopsided, painted in enthusiastic splashes of purple and blue. For Mom, she had written on the bottom in careful, childish letters. I love you to the moon. When had that love become conditional? When had we become disposable? Richard found me there, surrounded by memories. I was thinking, he said carefully, maybe we should redecorate this room. I looked up at him, this man who had stood beside me through everything. His suggestion wasn't about paint colors. It was about reclaiming space, physical and emotional. I'd like that, I said. That afternoon, we boxed up Olivia's remaining childhood items, labeling them neatly. Not throwing them away, we weren't that angry, but no longer giving them pride of place in our home. We would store them in the attic, available if ever wanted, but no longer defining our living space. It was a small act, but it felt significant, like the first step in a journey back to ourselves. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual. Richard was still asleep, his breathing deep and even. I slipped out of bed, made coffee, and took my cup to the back porch. The garden needed attention. Weeds had sprouted between the hostas, and the rose bushes needed pruning. I hadn't spent much time there lately. Wedding planning had consumed every spare moment for months. Before that, it had been helping Olivia with her apartment move. Before that, something else. Always something else. I set my coffee down, pulled on gardening gloves, and knelt in the soft earth. There was something meditative about pulling weeds, identifying what didn't belong, removing it carefully, roots and all, to prevent it from returning, making space for what you actually wanted to grow. 2 hours later, sweaty and dirt-smudged but oddly content, I went inside to shower. My phone showed 3 missed calls, all from Olivia. No voicemails, no texts, just calls, as if her need to speak was urgent, but not urgent enough to leave a message. I set the phone down without returning the calls. This, too, felt like growth. After my shower, I found Richard at the kitchen table, newspaper spread out, reading glasses perched on his nose. Such a familiar sight, so comforting in its ordinariness. I thought we might drive up to Lake Morrison this weekend, he said without looking up. The cabin should be open for the season. Might be nice to get away. Lake Morrison, our favorite retreat, a small cabin by the water that we visited several times each summer. We hadn't been since last year. Olivia had always found reasons why we shouldn't go when she might need us. That sounds perfect, I said. He looked up then, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Really? No hesitation about being unreachable for a few days. None at all. And I meant it. We were packing for our weekend trip when the doorbell rang. Richard went to answer it while I folded another sweater into my overnight bag. I heard murmured voices. Then Richard called, "Margaret, you might want to come down here." I descended the stairs to find Susan Clark, my younger sister, standing in our entryway. Her visit was unexpected. We hadn't spoken much in the past few months. "Susan, is everything okay?" She shifted uncomfortably. "I saw Olivia's posts about the wedding, and then I got a call from her yesterday. She's pretty upset." "Of course. She wasn't here for me. She was here as Olivia's proxy." "I'm sure she is," I said, keeping my voice neutral. Susan glanced at Richard, then back to me. "She said you canceled her wedding, that you pulled all the vendors halfway through. People are talking, Margaret." "Are they?" I moved past her to the living room, indicating she should follow. "And what exactly did Olivia tell you happened?" Susan sat on the edge of the sofa. "She said you got upset about some misunderstanding and retaliated by shutting everything down, that you couldn't handle not being the center of attention." Richard made a sound, half laugh, half scoff. I placed a hand on his arm. "Did she mention telling us we weren't invited, that we were asked to leave the venue before the ceremony even began?" Susan's expression changed. "What? We arrived at the wedding we had paid for entirely, and Olivia told us we weren't welcome, that it was her day and we needed to leave. The wedding planner escorted us out a side entrance so we wouldn't disturb the other guests." Susan's mouth opened, then closed. "She didn't say that part." "I'm not surprised." "But why would she do that?" I shrugged, the motion carrying years of accumulated hurt. "You'd have to ask her, but it wasn't a misunderstanding. It was very clear." Susan leaned back, processing. "And the vendors? Our names were on the contracts," Richard said. "We paid the deposits. Most final payments were pending. When we were told we weren't welcome at an event we were financing, we canceled what we legally could." "Oh," Susan was quiet for a moment. "That's not how she described it." "I'm sure it wasn't." Susan looked at me with new eyes. "I always thought you were, I don't know, overprotective with Olivia, that you had trouble letting go." She shook her head. "But this is different." "Yes, it is." After Susan left, promising to call soon, Richard and I finished packing in silence, but it wasn't the heavy silence of a few days ago. It was thoughtful, unburdened. Someone had finally heard our side. Someone had finally seen. Yeah. Lake Morrison was beautiful in late spring. The water reflected the clear blue sky, and the surrounding pines filled the air with their clean, sharp scent. Our cabin was small but comfortable, a living area with a stone fireplace, a tiny kitchen, one bedroom, and a screened porch overlooking the water. We arrived Friday afternoon and spent the evening on the porch, watching the sunset paint the lake in shades of orange and pink. We talked about everything except Olivia: books we wanted to read, places we might visit, projects around the house. It felt like rediscovering each other after a long absence. Saturday morning, Richard went fishing while I walked to the small town nearby. The bakery was still there, still making the cinnamon rolls we loved. The bookstore had changed hands, but remained charming and well-stocked. I bought a novel I'd been meaning to read and a local history book about the lake region. In the general store, I ran into Howard Miller, an old acquaintance who owned the cabin 2 doors down from ours. "Margaret Wilson, haven't seen you folks in ages. How's retirement treating Richard?" We chatted easily about weather and lake conditions until he mentioned, "Say, I ran into a colleague of your son-in-law's recently, Tyler. Wright works at First National." My interest sharpened. "Yes, that's right." Howard's expression changed subtly. "Shame about that business at the bank. Never good to see a young man get caught up in something like that." "I'm sorry." Howard looked confused. "The irregularities in the accounts I assumed you knew. It was all very hush-hush. But Kevin, he's on their compliance team, said Tyler was let go about 3 months ago. Something about improper handling of client funds. My mind raced. Tyler had lost his job 3 months ago, but Olivia had mentioned his work at the bank just weeks ago, talking about a promotion he was expecting. I think there must be some confusion, I said carefully. Tyler's still at the bank, as far as I know. Howard backpedaled immediately. You're probably right. Kevin might have been talking about someone else. Memory's not what it used to be. He changed the subject quickly, but the damage was done. When I returned to the cabin, I found Richard cleaning his catch by the lake. Good morning, he asked, noting my expression. Interesting, at least. I recounted my conversation with Howard. Richard's hands stilled. That would explain a few things. The sudden change in wedding plans, the rush, the need for us to just pay and not ask questions. You think Tyler lost his job and they didn't tell us? I think it's worth looking into. That evening, while Richard prepared dinner, I did something I'd never done before. I searched for Tyler online, beyond the cursory glance I'd given his social media when Olivia first started dating him. His LinkedIn profile still listed First National Bank as his employer. His Instagram showed carefully curated images of success, business lunches, golf outings, a new watch. Nothing to indicate any career trouble. But when I dug deeper, searching news about the bank, I found a small item from 3 months ago. First National announces internal restructuring. No specifics, no names, but the timing aligned with Howard's story. I searched for Tyler's parents next. The Reynolds family, supposedly old money. According to Olivia, Tyler's father, James Reynolds, was a retired investment banker. His mother, Martha, was involved in charity work. Their home in Westlake was valued at nearly $2 million. It all looked perfect on the surface. But something nagged at me. I searched property records for Westlake. The Reynolds home had been refinanced 3 times in the past 5 years. The most recent mortgage was just 6 months ago. I wasn't a financial expert, but that seemed excessive for a supposedly wealthy family. Then I found something else, a notice of default from 8 months ago. It had apparently been resolved, but still, financial troubles seemed to run in the family. When Richard called me for dinner, I closed my laptop, my mind spinning with implications. We ate on the porch, watching fireflies emerge as dusk settled over the lake. I think they're in financial trouble, I said finally. Both Tyler and his parents. Richard nodded slowly, and they saw Olivia, and by extension, us, as a solution. She always said his family had money, old money. Maybe they did, once. I thought about the elaborate wedding, the sudden changes in plans, the expensive dress Olivia had chosen after rejecting the one we had initially paid for. It all pointed to a desperate attempt to maintain appearances. Do you think Olivia knows? I asked. Richard considered this. If she does, she's complicit in the deception. If she doesn't, she's being used, I finished. Just like we were. The realization brought no satisfaction, only a hollow ache. Either our daughter was knowingly deceiving us, or she was being deceived herself. Neither possibility brought comfort. We returned home Sunday evening to find a package on our porch. No postage. It had been hand-delivered. Inside was a formal invitation on thick cream cardstock. Tyler and Olivia Reynolds request the pleasure of your company for a reconciliation dinner Friday, June 12th at 7:00 p.m., the Westlake Grill. A handwritten note was attached. Please come, we need to talk. Olivia, the Westlake Grill, one of the most expensive restaurants in the city. A place for business deals and anniversary celebrations. Richard handed the invitation back to me. What do you think? I thought about everything we had discovered, about the financial irregularities, about the wedding disaster, about years of being taken for granted. I think it's another performance, I said. Another attempt to manage the situation without addressing the real issues. He nodded. So, we don't go. I placed the invitation in the folder I had started, the one labeled What We Let Go. Yet it felt right there, alongside the other artifacts of our changing relationship with our daughter. Monday morning, I woke with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. After breakfast, I called Dr. Eleanor Hayes, a therapist whose name I had gotten from a friend months ago but never contacted. I'd like to schedule an appointment, I said when the receptionist answered. For me, not for family counseling, just for me. The words felt strange in my mouth, but right in my heart. Just for me. Not to fix my relationship with Olivia, not to be a better mother or wife, just to understand myself better. My first appointment was set for Thursday. Richard raised an eyebrow when I told him, but he seemed pleased. Good for you, he said simply. That afternoon, my phone rang, Tyler's number. I let it go to voicemail. His message was carefully modulated, professional. Margaret, it's Tyler. I hope you and Richard are well. Olivia and I were disappointed you couldn't attend the wedding. There seems to have been some miscommunication. We'd really like to clear the air. Please call me back when you have a moment. Miscommunication. As if Olivia's words, "You're not invited," could have been misinterpreted. I didn't call back. 2 hours later, he called again. This time, I answered. Hello, Tyler? Margaret? Thank you for picking up. Did you receive our invitation? We did. Excellent. We're looking forward to seeing you and Richard on Friday. The Westlake Grill has a wonderful new chef, and I've arranged for a private dining room where we can talk comfortably. His tone was smooth, confident, the voice of someone used to managing situations and people. It grated against my new awareness. We won't be attending, Tyler. A pause. I see. May I ask why? I think you know why. Another pause, longer this time. When he spoke again, his tone had shifted, colder, more direct. Look, Margaret, I understand you're upset about the wedding. Things got emotional. Mistakes were made. But Olivia is devastated. She's your only daughter. Don't you think you owe her the chance to make things right? Owe her? The word hit like a slap. I don't owe Olivia anything, I said, surprised by my own certainty. And I certainly don't owe you an explanation. Please don't contact us again unless you're ready to have an honest conversation, not a performance at an expensive restaurant. I hung up before he could respond. My hands were shaking, but not from fear or distress, from something that felt remarkably like power. The next day, I met Susan for coffee. My sister had called, wanting to talk more about what had happened. Without Olivia's version coloring her perspective, she was ready to listen. We sat at a corner table in a quiet cafe. Susan looked different somehow, more serious than her usual breezy self. I called Olivia after I left your house, she said, stirring her latte. I asked her directly if she told you to leave the wedding. And she admitted it, but she tried to justify it, said Tyler's parents were uncomfortable with your style, that you would have embarrassed her. I flinched despite myself. Susan reached across the table and squeezed my hand. It's nonsense, Margaret. I've known you my entire life. You're the least embarrassing person I know. Too proper, if anything. I smiled faintly. Thank you. The thing is, Susan continued, I've been thinking about this a lot, and I realized I've watched you bend over backwards for Olivia for years. You've always been there, financially, emotionally, practically, and she's always taken it for granted. Coming from Susan, this admission meant more than she could know. My sister had always been the fun aunt to Olivia, the one who thought I was too strict, too cautious, too involved. What changed your mind? I asked. Susan looked uncomfortable. Something Olivia said during our call. She mentioned that you and Richard had finally cut the purse strings, that you were using money to punish her. It was the way she said it, like your only value was financial. It made me remember things I'd overlooked before. How she calls you when she needs something, but is too busy when you suggest getting together. How she talked about your house as her inheritance, even while you were sitting right there at Thanksgiving. I nodded, throat tight. We've noticed the pattern too, recently. I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner, Susan said. I should have been a better sister. You're being one now. On the drive home, I thought about family, the bonds we're born into, and the boundaries we must sometimes create to keep those bonds healthy. I had always seen boundaries as walls, as barriers to closeness, but perhaps they were more like the banks of a river, necessary channels that direct the flow of love and prevent it from becoming a destructive flood. Thursday arrived, and with it, my first therapy appointment. Dr. Eleanor Hayes was in her mid-50s, with kind eyes and a direct manner I appreciated immediately. So, Margaret, she said after the preliminaries were complete, what brings you here today? I had rehearsed various answers, but what came out was unplanned. I've spent 32 years being someone's mother, and I've forgotten how to be myself. She nodded, unsurprised. That happens more often than you might think. Parenthood can become an all-consuming identity, especially for women. When did you first notice this feeling? Recently, very recently. I explained about the wedding, about Olivia's rejection, about our subsequent discoveries regarding Tyler's employment and finances. Dr. Hayes listened without judgment. When I finished, she asked a question that stopped me cold. What would your life have looked like if you hadn't been a parent? I had no answer because for 32 years, that had been my primary identity: provider, peacemaker, background character in someone else's life story. I don't know, I admitted. That's where we'll start. Then, she said, getting reacquainted with Margaret, not just as Olivia's mother or Richard's wife, but as herself. I left the session feeling both drained and strangely invigorated, like I had begun an important journey. When I got home, Richard was in the garage, working on his old motorcycle, a project he had abandoned years ago when Olivia needed help moving to her first apartment. The timing of its revival wasn't lost on me. How was it? He asked, wiping his hands on a rag. Good, different. She asked what my life would have looked like without being a parent. Richard leaned against the workbench. And I didn't have an answer. He nodded thoughtfully. I've been thinking about that too. Not in those exact terms, but similar questions. Remember how we used to talk about traveling after retirement? That road trip to the national parks. I did remember. We had maps, brochures, a rough itinerary, all set aside when Olivia announced her engagement. The wedding planning had consumed everything. Maybe we should revisit those plans, I suggested. His smile was answer enough. That evening, as we sat on the back porch watching the sunset, my phone rang. Olivia again. After a moment's hesitation, I answered. Mom? Her voice was subdued. You didn't come to the dinner. No, we didn't. I was trying to make things right. I took a deep breath. Arranging an expensive dinner isn't making things right. Olivia, it's managing appearances. There's a difference. What do you want from me? A hint of frustration crept into her voice. I said I was sorry. Had she, I couldn't recall an actual apology. I don't want anything from you right now, I said honestly. That's not why we declined. Then why? Because we're taking some time to reevaluate our relationship, all aspects of it. What does that mean? Now there was alarm in her tone. It means we're making some changes, financial and otherwise. Like what? What changes? I could have detailed the new trust arrangements, the updated will, the closed joint accounts, but that would have centered the conversation on money, exactly what I was trying to move away from. That's not a discussion I want to have right now. When we're ready to talk, really talk, not perform reconciliation over expensive meals, we'll let you know. So that's it. You're just cutting me off, your own daughter. The old guilt rose up, but I pushed it down. We're not cutting you off, Olivia. We're establishing boundaries. There's a difference. Dad would never agree to this, she said, changing tactics. Put him on the phone. Your father and I are united in this decision. Goodbye, Olivia. I ended the call and set the phone down on the table between Richard and me. He reached over and took my hand, squeezing gently. You okay? I considered the question carefully. Was I okay? My relationship with my only child was fractured. Decades of patterns were being broken. Nothing felt familiar or certain. And yet, yes, I said, surprised to find it was true. I think I am. Summer arrived with an unusual sense of freedom. For the first time in years, Richard and I made plans without first checking if Olivia might need us. We booked a 2-week trip to Yellowstone and Grand Teton National Parks, the journey we had postponed so many times. We joined a local book club. Richard restored his motorcycle and took weekend rides with a group of retired engineers. I started volunteering at the community garden, finding unexpected joy in nurturing plants and teaching children about growing food. I'd say life developed a new rhythm, one dictated by our own interests rather than someone else's demands. It wasn't that we had stopped loving Olivia. The ache of her absence remained, a dull pain that occasionally sharpened when I passed her favorite bakery or heard a song she had loved as a teenager. But the constant anxiety, the need to remain available, to anticipate her needs, to smooth her path, had lifted. Dr. Hayes, now Eleanor to me, continued to help me navigate this new terrain. Detachment doesn't mean abandonment, she reminded me during one session. You haven't stopped being Olivia's mother. You've just stopped making her the center of your universe. It still feels selfish sometimes, I admitted. Is Richard being selfish by restoring his motorcycle, by pursuing his interests? Of course not. Then why hold yourself to a different standard? It was a question I returned to often in the quiet moments of self-doubt that still surfaced. Why did my own happiness feel like a betrayal of motherhood? Who had taught me that maternal love required self-erasure? In June, Susan invited us to her lake house for the 4th of July weekend. Just family, she said. The good kind. The holiday had always been spent with Olivia in the past, but this year we accepted Susan's invitation without hesitation. The weekend was lovely, swimming in the cool lake water, barbecue on the deck, fireworks reflecting on the dark surface of the water. Susan's 2 grown sons were there with their partners, easy and affectionate, helping with dishes without being asked, genuinely interested in Richard's motorcycle stories and my gardening adventures. You seem different, Susan's older son Michael commented as we watched the fireworks display. More relaxed, I smiled. I feel different. Later, as Susan and I washed dishes side by side, she said quietly, I saw Olivia last week. My hands stilled momentarily in the soapy water. Oh, she came to my office, said she couldn't reach you. We haven't been taking her calls, I acknowledged. Not yet. Susan nodded. She wanted me to intercede, to convince you to stop this nonsense, as she put it. And what did you tell her? That it wasn't nonsense, that actions have consequences, even when you're used to being forgiven for everything. Susan handed me another plate. She didn't like that answer. I imagine not. She's in trouble. Margaret. I looked at my sister sharply. What kind of trouble? Financial, mostly. She was vague about the details, but reading between the lines, I gather Tyler lost his job some time ago. They've been pretending everything's fine, but, Susan shrugged, the facade is cracking. I dried a glass slowly, thinking, did she ask for money? Not directly, but that was the subtext of the entire conversation. I nodded, unsurprised. Thank you for telling me. What will you do? It was a good question. What would I do with this information? The old Margaret would have immediately opened her checkbook, would have seen Olivia's distress as permission to re-enter her life. The new Margaret wasn't so sure. Nothing? For now? I said finally. She needs to come to us directly, honestly. Susan smiled faintly. My big sister, setting boundaries. It's like watching a butterfly emerge from a chrysalis. At my age, it's more like watching a turtle finally learn to snap. We laughed, and the moment of tension passed. But that night, I lay awake beside Richard, thinking about Olivia in trouble. The maternal instinct to protect, to rescue, to fix remained strong, but something stronger held it in check. The knowledge that rescuing her again would only perpetuate the cycle. The confirmation of Olivia and Tyler's financial troubles came from an unexpected source. In mid-July, I ran into Martha Reynolds, Tyler's mother, at the grocery store. I almost didn't recognize her. The perfectly coiffed, designer-clad woman from the wedding was gone, replaced by someone who looked tired and considerably less polished. Margaret, she said, her smile strained. How unexpected. Martha. I nodded politely, preparing to continue past her to the produce section, but she stepped forward, blocking my path slightly. I've been meaning to call you, actually, about the wedding. That unfortunate misunderstanding. Misunderstanding. The same word Tyler had used, as if Olivia's direct statement, "You're not invited," could possibly be misinterpreted. Was there something specific you wanted to discuss? I asked, keeping my tone neutral. Martha glanced around, then lowered her voice. Perhaps we could have coffee sometime. There are explanations that might help you understand why things happened the way they did. I studied her face, the carefully applied makeup that couldn't quite hide the worry lines, the designer sunglasses pushed up on her head like a shield. There was desperation behind her polished veneer. I think I understand quite well. Martha, Tyler lost his job months ago. Your family's financial situation isn't what Olivia was led to believe. You needed our money for the wedding, but you didn't want us there disrupting the image you've worked so hard to maintain. Her face paled. Who told you that? No one had to tell me. It was obvious. Once I started paying attention, Martha's composure slipped. It wasn't my idea, she said quickly. James and I would never have suggested. Tyler and Olivia made that decision themselves. And you didn't object when they told the people paying for the entire event that they weren't welcome. She looked away. It was complicated. No, Martha, it really wasn't. I moved past her then, continuing my shopping as if the encounter hadn't shaken me. But it had. The confirmation that our suspicions were correct brought no satisfaction, only a deep sadness that our daughter had willingly participated in such a callous deception. When I told Richard about the encounter that evening, he shook his head in disgust. So they all knew. They all went along with it. It seems that way. And now they're in trouble, so suddenly they want to explain and make amends. I nodded, arranging vegetables in the refrigerator with more care than necessary. I suspect we'll be hearing from Olivia directly soon, now that she knows we know about Tyler's job. Richard leaned against the counter, arms crossed. What will you say when she calls? I don't know yet. But that wasn't entirely true. Part of me did know. Part of me had been preparing for this moment since the wedding day. The call came 3 days later, not from Olivia, but from Tyler. "Margaret," he began, his voice missing the smooth confidence of our previous conversations. "I think we need to clear the air. There have been some misunderstandings." "So I keep hearing," I replied, keeping my tone even. "Though I have to say, 'you're not invited' seems fairly unambiguous." He sighed. "Look, things got out of hand. We were under a lot of pressure. The wedding wasn't turning out the way we'd envisioned, and my parents had certain expectations." "Tyler," I interrupted, "let's not waste time. I know you lost your job at the bank months ago. I know your parents' financial situation isn't what you've pretended. I know the wedding was more about maintaining appearances than celebrating a marriage." Silence stretched across the line. "How did you find out?" he finally asked, his voice small. "It doesn't matter. What matters is that you and Olivia lied to us, repeatedly. You took our money while plotting to exclude us from an event we paid for entirely." "It wasn't like that." "It was exactly like that." Another long silence. Then, "We need help, Margaret." At least he had arrived at the real point of his call. "What kind of help? Financial? Temporary?" His words came faster now. "I have several promising job prospects. One is almost certain to come through next month. We just need to bridge the gap. Cover some expenses until then." "How much?" 20,000 would get us through the next few months, just until I'm back on my feet." The amount was significant, but not impossible. We had it. We could write a check today. "Where's Olivia?" I asked instead of answering. "Why isn't she the one making this call? She's not doing well. This situation has been hard on her. I'd like to speak with my daughter directly." "She's not home right now." "Then call me when she is." "This isn't a conversation I'm going to have with you alone." "Margaret, please. The timing is critical. We have payments due." "Goodbye, Tyler." I ended the call, my heart racing despite my calm exterior. $20,000. What had they done to need so much so quickly? And why wasn't Olivia making the request herself? I called Richard at his workshop to relay the conversation. 20,000, he echoed, disbelief evident in his voice. What on earth for? He didn't specify, just expenses. And Olivia conveniently wasn't available. That's what he claimed. Richard was quiet for a moment. "You think he's lying? That she doesn't know he called?" The thought had occurred to me. "I'm not sure. Either she's too ashamed to ask us directly, or she doesn't know how bad things really are," Richard finished. "Either way, we're not writing a check to Tyler." "Agreed." We hung up, the matter seemingly settled. But as I went about my day, watering the garden, preparing dinner, reading on the porch, the conversation nagged at me. Something didn't add up. 20,000 was a lot of money for simple living expenses, even for a couple accustomed to living beyond their means. That evening, I did something I had promised myself I wouldn't do again. I looked up Olivia on social media. Her recent posts painted the picture of a woman living her best life: brunches with friends, a weekend trip to a vineyard, a new designer handbag. No hint of financial distress, no indication that her husband was frantically trying to secure loans from her estranged parents. Either she was maintaining the facade with exceptional dedication, or she genuinely didn't know about their financial reality. I closed the laptop, troubled. If Tyler was hiding the extent of their problems from Olivia, what else might he be concealing? The answer came the very next day in the form of a distraught Olivia on our doorstep. I was reading in the living room when the doorbell rang. Through the front window, I saw our daughter standing on the porch, her posture rigid with tension. When I opened the door, I barely recognized her. The polished, confident woman who had dismissed us from her wedding was gone. In her place stood someone with smudged makeup, unwashed hair, and red-rimmed eyes. "Mom," she said, her voice breaking on the single syllable. Despite everything, my heart constricted at the sight of her distress. "Olivia, come in." She stepped inside, glancing around as if seeing our home for the first time, or perhaps the last. "Is Dad here? He's at his workshop. I can call him." "No, that's okay. I need to talk to you." I led her to the living room, noting how she perched on the edge of the sofa instead of settling into it as she once would have. Her hands twisted in her lap, her wedding ring catching the afternoon light. "Tyler's gone," she said abruptly. "Gone? He left yesterday, took his clothes, his car, emptied our joint account?" She looked up, her eyes wild. "He's been lying to me, Mom, about everything. His job, his family's money, all of it." I sat very still, absorbing this. "How did you find out?" "The bank called about missed mortgage payments, payments I thought he was making. When I confronted him, he admitted he'd lost his job months ago, that he'd been using credit cards to maintain our lifestyle, that his parents aren't wealthy at all. They're barely staying afloat themselves." She laughed, a bitter sound without humor. "You know what he said, at least we had a beautiful wedding. As if that mattered now." The irony was almost too much. "Olivia, and then he told me he'd asked you for money." Her eyes flashed with sudden anger. "That you refused to help us, your own daughter." Ah, so that was why she was here. Not for comfort or reconciliation, but to confront me about not saving her from the consequences of her actions. Again. "Tyler called yesterday," I confirmed. "He asked for $20,000, but wouldn't explain exactly what it was for. I told him I needed to speak with you directly." "And if he had put me on the phone, would you have given him the money then?" I met her gaze steadily. "No," her face crumpled. "Why not? You have it. I know you do. That's not the point, Olivia. Then what is that you're punishing me, that you're enjoying watching me suffer?" The accusation stung, but I kept my voice level. "I don't enjoy your suffering. I never have. But giving Tyler money wouldn't have solved the real problem." "What problem?" "The pattern. The one where you make choices without considering consequences, then expect us to rescue you." She stood abruptly. "I knew this was a mistake. I knew you wouldn't help me." "I didn't say I wouldn't help you," I clarified. "I said I wouldn't give Tyler $20,000 with no accountability." She paused, confusion crossing her face. "What's the difference?" "The difference is I'll help my daughter, but I won't enable behaviors that hurt her in the long run." I took a deep breath. "Sit down. Olivia, let's talk about what's really going on and what happens next." For a moment, I thought she might leave. Her body was tense, poised for flight. But then, slowly, she sank back onto the sofa. "I don't know what to do," she whispered, and for the first time, she sounded like my daughter again. Not the cold woman who had dismissed us from her wedding, but the little girl who had once come to me with scraped knees and broken toys, trusting I could fix anything. "First, we need to understand exactly what you're dealing with," I said gently. "How much debt are we talking about? What assets do you have? What immediate needs must be addressed?" Over the next hour, Olivia's financial situation emerged in all its alarming detail. Tyler had lost his job after a minor scandal involving expense accounts. Rather than admit this failure, he had maintained their lifestyle through increasingly desperate means, maxing out credit cards, taking cash advances, even borrowing against Olivia's car. The 20,000 he had requested from us wasn't for general expenses. It was to pay off a high-interest loan from a questionable source that was now making threatening calls. "Why didn't you tell us any of this was happening?" I asked when she finished. Olivia stared at her hands. "I didn't know most of it myself. Tyler handled the finances. And after the wedding, I didn't think you'd want to hear from me." "Because you told us to leave?" She flinched. "Yes." "Why did you do that? Olivia, really?" She was quiet for so long, I thought she might not answer. Then, in a small voice, "Tyler said your presence would embarrass his family, that they had certain expectations about the kind of wedding we should have, that if we wanted to be accepted in their social circle, certain adjustments were necessary. And you believed him." "I trusted him." She looked up, tears streaming now. "I wanted to belong to that world, the country club memberships, the charity galas, the summer homes. I thought that's what I wanted. And when he said you and Dad wouldn't fit in, you chose his world over your family." She nodded miserably. "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so, so sorry." It was the first genuine apology she had offered, and it landed like a weight on my heart, heavy with the recognition of how much damage had been done, but also with the first real hope that healing might be possible. "I know you are," I said softly. "But sorry is just the beginning. Real amends take time and consistent action." "What do I do now?" she asked, sounding lost. "Now," I said, reaching for my phone. "We call your father, and then we start making a plan." Good. Richard arrived home 30 minutes later, his initial shock at finding Olivia in our living room quickly giving way to practical concern as we outlined the situation. By evening, a preliminary plan had taken shape. No, we would not give Olivia $20,000 outright, but we would help her negotiate with creditors, consult with a lawyer about Tyler's financial misconduct, and provide temporary support while she found her footing. "You'll need to find an apartment you can actually afford," Richard explained, reviewing the budget we had sketched out. "And a job, something stable." "I have my marketing degree," Olivia said hesitantly. "I've been freelancing, but I could look for something permanent." "That's a good start," I agreed. "We'll help you with first and last month's rent on a modest apartment, and we'll co-sign if necessary, given your credit situation, but you'll be responsible for the monthly payments." "What about the loan, the one Tyler took out? They've been calling, threatening." Richard's expression darkened. "We'll have our lawyer deal with that. If it's as predatory as it sounds, there may be legal remedies. And in the meantime," I added, "you'll move into the guest room, just until we sort out the apartment situation." Olivia looked up, surprise evident on her face. "You'd let me stay here after everything." "You're still our daughter," Richard said simply. "We're not throwing you out on the street." But there were conditions. She would contribute to household expenses. She would attend financial counseling. She would join me in a session with Dr. Hayes to begin addressing the deeper patterns in our relationship. "This isn't a rescue," I explained carefully. "It's a reset, a chance to rebuild on healthier terms." Olivia nodded, a mixture of relief and trepidation on her face. "I understand." That night, after Olivia had gone to bed in her old room, now the guest room, its walls repainted a tranquil blue, its shelves filled with books instead of childhood mementos, Richard and I sat on the back porch, processing the day's dramatic turn. "Do you think she means it?" he asked quietly. "The apology, the commitment to change." I considered the question carefully. "I think she wants to mean it. Whether she can follow through." I shrugged. "That remains to be seen. And if she can't, if this is just another manipulation, then we'll have done what we could, with clear boundaries, and we'll continue living our lives. He reached for my hand in the darkness. When did you get so wise? I smiled, though he probably couldn't see it in the dim light. Around the same time, I stopped letting fear of losing love determine my every action. We sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of the garden. Somewhere in the house behind us, our daughter slept under our roof for the first time in years, not as the child we had once protected from every hardship, but as a grown woman facing the consequences of her choices, with our support but not our rescue. It wasn't the relationship I had imagined having with my adult daughter, but perhaps it could be something more honest, more balanced, and ultimately more loving than what we had before. The weeks that followed were not easy. Olivia moved through our home like a ghost at first, uncertain of her place, awkward in her gratitude. I caught her staring at the changes we had made, the redecorated guest room, Richard's motorcycle in the garage, the new bookshelves filled with titles we had always meant to read, evidence of the lives we had reclaimed in her absence. For my part, I had to resist the constant urge to smooth her path, to solve her problems before she could even articulate them. Old habits surfaced unbidden, making her favorite meals without asking, picking up after her, anticipating her needs. Dr. Hayes helped me recognize these patterns and interrupt them. She's not a child anymore, Eleanor reminded me during one session. When you treat her like one, you're communicating that you don't believe she's capable of adult responsibilities. But what if she isn't? I asked, voicing my deepest fear. What if she fails? Then she learns from failure, just like the rest of us. Olivia found a job at a local marketing firm, not as prestigious as her freelance clients had been, but stable, with benefits and a reasonable salary. She began the painstaking process of rebuilding her credit, untangling her finances from Tyler's, and coming to terms with the reality of her situation. Tyler himself had apparently moved to Chicago, leaving a trail of debt and broken promises behind him. His parents sold their house and downsized to a small condo, the facade of prosperity finally crumbling under the weight of financial reality. By September, Olivia had saved enough for the security deposit on a small apartment not far from her new job. Richard and I helped her move in, carrying boxes and assembling furniture, but deliberately stepping back from decorating decisions or financial contributions beyond what we had initially agreed to. It's small, she said as we surveyed the finished space. A one-bedroom with a tiny kitchen and living area. But it's mine. I can afford it on my own. There was pride in her voice, tentative but real. Perhaps the first time she had felt genuine ownership of her accomplishments, without the cushion of our support making success inevitable. It's a good start, Richard said, and I heard the approval in his tone. That evening, back in our own home, I noticed the silver-wrapped box still sitting on my dresser, the family necklace that Olivia had refused to even look at on her wedding day. I picked it up, weighing it in my hand, considering. What are you thinking? Richard asked, watching me from the doorway. I'm thinking it's time to put this away, I said, placing the box in my jewelry drawer. Not forever, just until it's right. He nodded, understanding what I couldn't quite articulate. The necklace represented a tradition, a connection between generations. Giving it to Olivia now, when our relationship was still healing, would feel forced. Someday, perhaps, when the gift could be received with genuine appreciation for what it represented, not just its material value. Thanksgiving approached with a new dilemma. Would we invite Olivia to join us? And if so, how would we navigate the complicated emotions that the holiday would inevitably bring, "What do you want to do?" Richard asked as we discussed the options. "I want to have a peaceful holiday," I said honestly. "I want to enjoy your company and Susan's without walking on eggshells or managing someone else's feelings." "So, no, Olivia," I sighed. "That feels wrong too. She's alone now, and she has been trying." It was true. Over the past months, Olivia had maintained her job, paid her bills on time, and attended both financial counseling and occasional family therapy sessions with me. Our relationship remained tentative, marked by careful conversations and deliberate boundaries, but it was improving. "What if we invite her with clear parameters?" Richard suggested. "A specific time frame, defined expectations." We decided to invite Olivia for Thanksgiving dinner only, not the entire weekend as had been our tradition. We would cook together, eat, perhaps play a board game, and then she would return to her apartment, clear, manageable, with built-in boundaries. When I extended the invitation, Olivia's response surprised me. "Actually," she said, sounding hesitant, "I was thinking I might host this year, at my place. It's small, but I'd like to try." The offer caught me off guard. "You want to cook Thanksgiving dinner? I've been taking cooking classes," she admitted. "Part of my, I don't know, self-improvement plan, learning to do things for myself instead of expecting others to do them for me." I felt a swell of unexpected emotion, pride, perhaps, or simply recognition of genuine effort. "That sounds lovely," I said. "What can we bring? Just yourselves. I want to do this. For you and Dad." On Thanksgiving Day, Richard and I arrived at Olivia's apartment with a bottle of wine, but otherwise empty-handed, as requested. The small space was transformed, clean, decorated with simple fall arrangements. The table set with mismatched but charming dishes she must have found at thrift stores. "Welcome," she said, her smile nervous but genuine. "Everything's almost ready." The meal wasn't perfect. The turkey was slightly overdone. The gravy had lumps, and the pumpkin pie had cracked down the middle. But Olivia had made everything herself, from scratch, without assistance or rescue. "This is delicious," Richard said, and I could tell he meant it. After dinner, as we sat with coffee and the imperfect pie, Olivia reached into a drawer and pulled out a small package. "I made something for you," she said, pushing it across the table toward me. Inside was a handmade card, simple but clearly created with care. On the front was a pressed flower from the community garden where I volunteered. Inside, Olivia had written, "Mom, thank you for not saving me when what I really needed was to learn how to save myself. I'm sorry for the pain I caused. I'm working on becoming someone worthy of the love you've always given me. Even when I didn't appreciate it. I love you. Olivia." I read it twice, tears blurring my vision. It wasn't a grand gesture. It wasn't expensive or elaborate, but it was perhaps the most genuine gift she had ever given me. Acknowledgement, appreciation, and a promise to continue growing. "Thank you," I said simply, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. She squeezed back, her eyes reflecting my own emotion. "I mean it, Mom, every word." Later, as we prepared to leave, Olivia walked us to the door. "I was thinking," she said, a hint of her old hesitation returning. "Maybe we could have dinner once a month just to check in, if you want to." It was a small request, reasonable, with no assumptions or entitlement behind it. "We'd like that," Richard answered for both of us. On the drive home, we were quiet, processing the unexpected grace of the evening. "She's really trying," Richard said finally. "Yes," I agreed. "She is. It doesn't erase what happened." "No, it doesn't. But it's something." I nodded, watching the familiar streets pass by outside the window. It's a beginning. Yay. In December, I found myself back in Dr. Hayes's office, reflecting on the changes of the past months. "How are you feeling about your relationship with Olivia now?" she asked. I considered the question carefully. "It's different, smaller in some ways. We don't talk daily. We don't drop everything when she calls, but healthier, more honest." "And how is that for you?" "Mostly good, sometimes sad. I mourn the easy closeness we'll probably never have, but I appreciate the authentic connection we're building instead." Eleanor nodded. "That's a mature perspective. Relationships evolve. Sometimes they have to break before they can reform into something sustainable. Like a broken bone that heals stronger at the fracture point. Exactly like that." As Christmas approached, we navigated new traditions. Olivia would join us for Christmas Eve dinner, then spend Christmas Day with friends from work. Richard and I would celebrate quietly at home, then visit Susan and her family for dessert. On Christmas Eve, after a pleasant dinner, Olivia helped me wash dishes while Richard built a fire in the living room. "I've been thinking," she said, carefully drying a serving platter, "about the wedding, about why I did what I did." I kept my voice neutral. "Oh, it wasn't just Tyler's influence, though that was part of it. It was me, too. I wanted so badly to be seen as successful, sophisticated, to impress his family, his friends." She set the platter down carefully. "I think I was ashamed." "Of what?" "Of being ordinary, of coming from a normal, middle-class family, of not having the pedigree Tyler pretended to have." She looked at me directly. "I was so busy trying to be someone else that I threw away the best part of who I actually am, your daughter." The simple honesty of the statement caught me off guard. "Thank you for saying that." "I'm still working on it, being comfortable with who I am, not needing expensive things or impressive connections to feel valuable." She smiled faintly. "The irony is, now that I'm paying my own bills and making my own way, I actually like myself better, even if my apartment is tiny and my furniture is secondhand." "I like who you're becoming too," I said honestly. After Olivia left that evening, Richard and I sat by the fire, sharing the last of the wine. "She's growing up," he observed. Finally. Better late than never. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. "I was going to wait until tomorrow, but this seems like the right moment." Inside was a delicate silver charm bracelet with a single charm, a butterfly emerging from a chrysalis. "Susan's metaphor stuck with me," he explained. "You've transformed this year, Margaret, found your wings." I clasped the bracelet around my wrist, touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift and what it represented. "We both have," I said. "Found our wings. I mean," later, lying in bed, I thought about transformation, how painful and necessary it can be, how we resist it, fearing the loss of what is familiar, even when what is familiar no longer serves us. I thought about the year behind us, the wedding disaster that had forced us to finally see the truth, the painful separation that followed, the slow, careful rebuilding of relationships on healthier terms. I thought about Olivia, not the perfect daughter I had imagined having, but the real, flawed, growing woman she actually was, someone capable of both terrible selfishness and genuine remorse, someone still learning, still becoming. And I thought about myself, not just Olivia's mother or Richard's wife, but Margaret Wilson, a woman with interests and boundaries and a voice that deserved to be heard, someone who had spent decades focused outward and was finally learning to look inward as well. The journey wasn't over. Real change never is. But as I drifted toward sleep, the bracelet cool against my skin, I felt something I hadn't expected to feel after such a difficult year: peace. Not the fragile peace that comes from avoiding conflict, but the lasting kind that grows from facing hard truths, and choosing to build something better in their wake. Someday, perhaps, I would give Olivia the family necklace, not as an inheritance or obligation, but as a gift between two women who had earned the right to celebrate their connection. Not yet, but someday. For now, it was enough to know we were all exactly where we needed to be, no longer entangled in unhealthy patterns, but walking our separate paths with clearer eyes and stronger boundaries. Not perfect, but real, and in its own way, beautiful.